We should probably get going. A very warm welcome here to Burgess Road Library. It's great to have you here this evening. If you're local, you'll know that this building in which you are sitting is a multi-use facility. It hosts both the public library, run in partnership with Southampton City Council, and a local church, as well as a whole range of activities connected with both of those things, from a mums and toddlers group to a dads and kids and Lego group to a community choir, free English lessons for international guests, and all sorts of other things. At the moment, being a Sunday, it is church mode, but I'm aware that we have with us a number of different people from the local community who are nothing to do with church, and you are very, very welcome here this evening. Delighted to have you. My name is Orlando Sayre. I am senior pastor of Christ Church Southampton. That's the church that meets here Sunday by Sunday and also in Cantell School. For the avoidance of doubt, I will be a totally neutral chair this evening. I don't know any of the candidates. I have not decided which way I will vote. And when I do, he will not be in this constituency anyway, because I live the other side of the great dividing range that is Burgess Road. With me this evening are Geoff Bentley, candidate for the UK Independence Party, Craig Dobson, candidate for the Liberal Democrats. Fletcher, thank you very much. Claire Ransom, candidate for the Labour Party, and Caroline Nokes, candidate for the Conservative Party. Can I invite you to put your hands together and welcome them in an appropriate way? It would be lovely this evening to keep a positive and respectful tone throughout the evening, if that's all right. So no heckling or booing or interruptions, please. The format of the evening is very simple. In a moment, I'm going to invite each of the candidates to give a short statement about what they feel this country needs more than anything else at this point. Just be a few minutes long for each of them. It's then over to you as an audience to ask your questions. And I think question askers have all submitted their questions in advance and they know who they are. And if you think you're asking a question but you haven't checked in and made it clear to the stewards, then I'd ask you to do that before we do anything else. I'm hoping that we will be able to get through a fair few questions this evening. But I should say we will guillotine the evening at 7:15. So that people can get back to enjoy the rest of their evenings. The evening is being filmed. It will be published online. If that is an issue with anybody here, then I don't know what to say. Maybe make your escape quickly. Fire exits are behind you, the door that you came in at, and to your right over in this direction here, in the eventuality that they're needed. One of the reasons we as a church were keen to host this meeting is that we are committed to following the lead of Jesus in, as he puts it, loving our neighbour. We believe we can love our neighbour just by showing it in our personal actions. We're committed to doing that. But we're also here because in a democracy, we can love and serve our neighbours nationwide by using our votes in an informed way. Well, I think that's enough from me by way of preliminaries. It would be interesting to know a little bit about you, though, as an audience. Can I ask, first of all, is there anybody here who is a first-time voter this election? Put your hands up if that applies to you. Just a very small number there. Can I ask you another question in that case? If there's anybody here, if there's anybody here who's not decided yet which way you will vote, again, raise your hands if you don't know where you're going. That is really something around half the room, which should make it an interesting evening. Well, now let's get to hear from the candidates as they each make a short introductory statement. As I say, addressing that question, what this country needs more than anything else right now. Geoff.
Well, yes. Shall I stay sitting for the microphone, I suppose? I think this country... I'll just introduce myself first. My name's Geoff. I'm a tree surgeon. I've cut trees all over the Test Valley, in Salisbury, New Forest. I've met all sorts of people doing this kind of work, all walks of life. I've also been a document controller and an archivist, solicitors firms in Southampton, and the NHS at Porton Down. What does this country need at the moment? I think perhaps a little bit more respect for democracy would be one thing. In 2015, UKIP got more votes combined than the Liberal Democrats and the Scottish National Party combined. Yet we only got one member of Parliament. So to start with, I think a system of proportional representation would be good. You'd have a lot more Green candidates in Parliament. Also, in 2017, most of the candidates that stood for election promised that they would honour the result of the referendum. But we haven't left yet. It's because most of the candidates that were elected in 2017 have prevented us from leaving the European Union. The EU can't prevent us from leaving. It's if the European Union still have control of our military and their courts still have jurisdiction over us, then we have not left the European Union. And that will be the case if an agreement is made and we go into this transition period, which could last for anything between 3 to 8 years. Also, we know that the Tories, for example, do not want a clean break Brexit. For example, they've returned the whip to 10 of the MPs who rebelled against them and voted for the Benn Act. There's also one of the candidates that they have not returned the whip to, who is now a Lib Dem candidate in another constituency. The Tory party have replaced with another Remainder candidate. So we know that a vote for Conservative is not a vote to leave the European Union. Neither do I think is a vote for Labour, and obviously not for Lib Dems. And that's why I'm standing here today, is to offer the people of Romsey and Southampton North a real choice in this election, an election which is all about Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Okay, so what does this country need more than anything else right now? And I think for one word summed up for me, and that's hope. Because hope is a far more powerful emotion than fear and anger, and we've had far too much of both of those for the past 3.5 years. Hope can really inspire people to lead change, driven by the desire and belief that things can be better, and they really can. But to give us hope, we need to have politicians that are in it for the right reasons, that are prepared to put their constituents before their career. We need honest politicians being prepared to work collaboratively to deal with the problems we face as a country, not descend into tribalism and extremes. As I'm a Liberal Democrat, we want to avoid a no-deal Brexit, absolutely, and all the damage that will cause. Only yesterday we had the Institute of Fiscal Studies said that a no-deal Brexit would increase public borrowing by £220 billion over the next Parliament. That's £8,000 a household. So we need a sensible plan to deal with that. Our plan to deal with that is through a second referendum, which we've been calling for since the very beginning. We tried 7 times in the floor of the House with amendments. 7 times both major parties rejected a second referendum. And do not be fooled by slogans like "Get Brexit Done." That's merely the doorway to the next step of the far harder, trickier and longer discussions that will not be done by Christmas next year. They will take far longer. We need Brexit stopped so we can tackle the very real issues this country faces. And that's the NHS, social care, education, and the huge climate crisis. We need to get that all sorted. And whilst the oxygen is being taken from Parliament, none of that's getting dealt with. Our NHS is at breaking point, and it literally runs on the goodwill of the staff. And we've got huge amounts of vacancies in the NHS. And before we even look further than that, climate change. It's a massive thing. It's the biggest problem we face, all of us. We can argue about membership of clubs if we like. It doesn't matter if London and billions of people have been displaced by sea levels rising 10 to 20 metres. It doesn't matter. And we need to get stuck in to fix that. I look at the front bench of both political parties. I'm from business, 20 years, building and selling companies, from small business right up to PLCs. I look at the front bench of both political parties and I go, is this our best? Really? That's the best this country has to offer? We need people in this country to come together with the skills needed to fix it. And we don't need another 5 years of broken Tory promises, basically. We need to deliver on our public services. Now, as Liberal Democrats, we have experience of the government. We're unlikely to form the next one, but we will likely hold the balance of power. And every vote for us gives us a stronger voice to hold both major parties to account and help mediate a way out of this situation that the country faces. The country needs hope, the country needs change, and the country definitely deserves a brighter future. And every vote for Liberal Democrats will deliver that. So thank you.
Claire.
Thank you. So for me, what our country needs is action on climate change. Labour has planned a green industrial revolution, and it has to start now, like Extinction Rebellion and Friends of the Earth have said. We are facing a climate emergency. The risk and cost of delay is far greater than the challenge we might face in getting others to act with us. Labour will permanently ban fracking. We will build 7,000 new offshore wind turbines and introduce a zero carbon standard for all new homes. We need properly funded public services. As somebody who's worked in local government for 9 years and as a trade union activist, I've seen damage the central government cuts have done to councils like Southampton City Council. If you're not already aware, by 2020, councils will have lost 60 pence in every £1 because of cuts to core funding over the past decade. Public services need funding in order to recover from the cuts that they've suffered, but also to meet future demand. For me, publicly owned and properly funded National Health Service is going to be really important. I appreciate the value of the NHS to us as a society. Having access to healthcare, regardless of the amount of money you have, is an incredible asset to our country and a testimony to acting collectively to benefit everyone. However, I'll speak from an individual perspective on this one. I have type 1 diabetes. So I'm insulin dependent. If we end up with an American-style health system, I won't be able to afford to pay for health insurance, which will cover the cost of my medication. I might have to cut the amount of food that I eat and the amount of money that I'm spending. And like a number of Americans, I would have to ration my insulin. Those of you who aren't aware, in 2018, the price of a single vial, so a very small glass bottle of insulin, in the States cost more than $250. I'm on 2 types of insulin, and most diabetics use 2 to 4 vials of insulin a month. Like many other people, I literally could not live without the NHS. Labour will end the privatisation of the National Health Service. We need a national education system, high-quality childcare for 2 to 4-year-olds that is not means-tested. We need to scrap university tuition fees and provide free adult education. Education has to be accessible throughout our lifetimes. It shouldn't just be a cut-off when you hit sort of 21. You should be encouraged to learn throughout your life. We need decent, affordable homes, and that includes rent controls, binding minimum standards so landlords are held to account. It means having a redefinition of what affordable homes mean. It's not 80% of market rate. It should be based on an average local income, so it's affordable to people who live in the area. And Labour's going to bring empty homes back into use by giving councils power to tax properties that are left empty for over a year. We need protection at work. Working people have been exploited through use of 0 hours contracts, and irregular income has messed up their social security payments. And that puts people into financial hardship and leaves them reliant on food banks. We need a living wage of £10 per hour for everyone. Just because somebody's under 25 doesn't mean that they haven't got cheaper bills. It doesn't mean that they eat less. It doesn't mean that they have to travel less. They are often doing the same amount of work using the same amount of skill as somebody like me who's in their 30s. Labour is committed to equal employment rights from day one on the job. We shouldn't have to work for 2 years before we can put in legal claims to challenge an employer's breach of the law. We need the right and access to justice. Employers shouldn't have protection when flouting what should be our basic rights. More than anything else, though, this country needs a government that will protect the most vulnerable in our society, and Labour will put people before profit.
Thank you. And Caroline.
Well, I'd just like to start by thanking Orlando and Christchurch for hosting this evening. I was very struck by the number of people who put up their hands saying they had not yet decided how they were going to vote. Without being too anecdotal, I can remember the first time I ever did a hustings, it was with John Denham. And he, as he stood up, looked around the audience and said, I don't think there's anybody here who didn't decide how they were going to vote in 1983. So it's great that there are people who are still undecided and still looking to make their decisions. I think the one thing, and I am going to stick to one thing, that this country needs more than anything else is certainty. Without certainty, we cannot have a strong economy that we absolutely require in order to fund our public services. And I think everybody on this panel would agree that we need to be spending more on our NHS and on our schools. Without certainty, we will not have the action that we need to have on climate change. And without certainty, we will not deliver on the outcome of the largest democratic vote this country has seen, the referendum in 2016. I'm sure that 3 of us on this panel voted Remain in that referendum for good reasons. However, I absolutely accept the outcome of that referendum, but have always said it must be delivered safely, with a deal. And that's why I voted for Theresa May's deal 3 times. And I think it's crucially important, now that the Prime Minister has secured a new deal, that what we need most in Parliament is the certainty of a majority that will deliver it. And of course, should we see a hung Parliament, and Craig has said it this evening, with the Liberal Democrats mediating, then we'll be going down the route of a further referendum. Labour have also said that there will be another referendum. And that's not providing certainty. We've already had 3.5 years since that referendum passed. We cannot afford for there to be another 6 months, 12 months, however long it takes. And will a second referendum bring us the social cohesion that this country so desperately needs, or will it provide further division, further dither, further delay? So I think it's absolutely crucial that we have that certainty moving forward. And I think importantly, the Romsey and Southampton North constituency deserves somebody with experience, somebody with a track record of standing up for this area over a long period of time. I have a proud reputation of being one of the most responsive MPs in Parliament. That's not always easy to deliver on. That means that I'm often replying to constituents' concerns in the small hours of the morning. It's a good job that I suffer from insomnia. And it matters that people know that they have somebody who's listening to their voice, just as I listened to their voices back in September when I proved that I had the independent spirit, the ability and the determination to stand up when I thought something was wrong. And I think that that matters in this constituency. I know that I am blessed with having had a constituency where there was one of the highest proportions of graduates in the country. We have an articulate, intelligent and educated constituency here. And it's important that you have somebody who has a track record of sticking up for you when the going gets tough.
Well, thank you very much to our 4 candidates here this evening. Lots of issues raised there, and I'm quite certain that a number of them will be picked up a little bit later on as we go on through this evening. If you're worried that all the answers will be that long, don't be. I do have my phone here. I will be timing answers, and they will be considerably less for the rank and file answers to the general questions that are going to be following. We're going to start off, though, with a couple of general questions, which I think will get us into a little bit about how the minds of our candidates tick and what's important to them. So can we have our first question, please?
How do you work out what issues to prioritise? You've mentioned a number. On what basis do you work out what's going to be important to prioritise?
Can we have Claire?
Thank you for your question, Sophie. Much appreciated. For me, what's a priority is looking after the vulnerable in our society. As a local government worker, I have seen the cuts that our housing department is suffering, the lack of provision of affordable housing, as I've mentioned already. I think it's essential that we have stable services for people as well. For instance, in terms of homelessness services, or youth services, if they're simply project funded, they are only there for maybe a year to 2 years at best. And actually, people need good, solid public services that they can rely on. For me, I'm also seeing, hopefully most people are kind of aware of the rising levels of child poverty. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation have reported on that as well. I'm really concerned about people's attitudes at the moment. Something that I've heard recently in response to somebody who was reliant on a food bank, it was necessary, they were necessary innocent collateral. That's not the attitude. We need to be changing attitudes in our society as well. And I really believe that comes through adequate health service and public funding.
Thank you. Caroline.
So how do I prioritise? I think that's a really interesting question, because for me, a significant proportion of it will be about instinct. This is the constituency that I grew up in. It's where I went to school. And I like to think that, apart from being a remote member of Parliament who has nothing in common with her constituents, I have always had a gut feeling for what people are thinking. But I think it's also crucial to look at the postbag that you receive, to understand the range of issues that people are approaching you about and are concerned about. And of course, it's also about the national picture. So there will be times of national crisis. Things like terrorist attacks always bring home that the government's first responsibility is to look after its citizens, to make sure that they are safe. So it is absolutely imperative that you be able to balance the local and the national. And I think I've always sought to do that. And I think it's important to listen to a wide variety of voices. I'm very conscious that in this constituency, there is pretty much a 50-50 split between Leave and Remain. I'm always conscious that this constituency elected me as a Conservative. So I think it's important to try my best to uphold the manifesto that I was elected on. But I do think it's crucial to spend time listening to people, and importantly, to always challenge yourself and perhaps your own existing preconceptions.
Thank you. Craig.
You'll probably get a very similar answer to what you've just heard. It's what feels right, number one, because empathy is a key thing, understanding what feels right, what problems you're seeing, but you need to have a macro and a micro view. So you need to not only look at the bigger picture in terms of national statistics, what's happening on the national level, but absolutely talking to people on the ground. And that's a critical thing. I mean, I've knocked on thousands of doors in the last few months, and I love talking to people. And I like to be challenged by people who have differences of opinion with me. I think that is the key way, because otherwise you really can't empathise unless you talk to people and try and put yourself in their shoes. So a combination of both helicopter view and on the ground listening as well.
Thank you. And finally, Geoff.
Well, our priority is pretty obvious. Leaving the European Union, followed shortly by immigration. But we do have policies for every area of government. We are a libertarian party, which means we believe in smaller government, less interference in people's lives, more personal freedoms for people to live their lives how they want to live them. We don't just believe in an independent, self-governing, sovereign nation, but independent, self-governing, sovereign individual. Thank you.
So in that case, we'll move straight on to the next question, which comes from Thomas. Where are you?
Good evening. With the police uplift due to deliver hundreds of new officers to Hampshire over the next few years, what recommendations would you make to the police and crime commissioner with the additional resources?
Thank you. Caroline?
So I think it's really important that the Police and Crime Commissioner works hand in hand with the Chief Constable about the deployment of resources. You would expect me to say this, representing a constituency for the last 9.5 years that has a significant rural-urban split, that balance has to be got right. And we need to see a focus on rural policing and some of the challenges that there have been around farm crime in particular. There have been some great initiatives over the last few years, including Farm Watch, which has helped to address some of that, but only a proportion of it. I think it's not just about more police officers on the street. It's about making sure that they're equipped with the tools to investigate quickly, efficiently, using the right technology. And of course, we also have to see more investment in the justice system so that people can be brought to trial much more effectively. Not a job for the Police and Crime Commissioner to determine. But I think it is important that elected politicians at all levels are prepared to work together to make sure that we get the right solutions across a very, very diverse county.
Thank you. Geoff.
More police on the streets for a start. You'll have to excuse me, by the way. 3 weeks ago, I didn't think I'd be sitting here at hustings fighting a general election. We do believe that police forces must be required to investigate real crimes, the person and the property and the priority, not social media hate speech accusations. The Metropolitan Police reportedly has 900 plus special officers dedicated to investigating hate crime while the city endures stabbing and acid attacks epidemics. And that's about all I can really say.
Thank you very much. Claire.
So I understand there'll be increased police resources. However, we need to make sure that we are having a fair allocation in areas where they're needed. I'm aware that in Bassett in particular, there's been an increase in residential crime in terms of robberies, and that seems to be particularly prevalent in the student areas. So that suggests to me that the student community does need additional support in policing. I'm also keen to sort of look at the rates and the timescales it takes for an investigation of a crime, because the longer it takes for investigation to happen, the less likely we are to see justice. And we've seen that in some of the other sort of major cases across the country. I also think that it's really important to kind of go back to constituents and to ask them for anecdotal evidence. And we have a lot of data, but I think it's really key to get the voice of and see how people are feeling in terms of their levels of safety in the community, and act on sort of qualitative as well as quantitative data.
Thank you. And Craig.
Absolutely. So the policing levels at the moment are not enough. They ask any police officer, they'll tell you that they do not feel they have enough resources. I don't think what's going to be added is going to be enough. And I think in terms of making use of finite resources, getting that balance is going to be very difficult. It needs to be a combination of prevention as well as the stick in terms of the visual deterrence on the street as well. I know people would like to see more police on the streets, but also a focus on making sure that balance is right between the rural, as Caroline said, the rural and the city side, because it is a very big constituency. But also, we won't solve a lot of the crime unless we take a healthcare approach to some of the aspects of crime, particularly mental health. The police spend a lot of their time dealing with mental health. They are not the best people to deal with. So we have to have a multidisciplinary, multi-service approach to dealing with crime, because it's not just about bobbies on the beat, it's about prevention and treating the underlying issues of crime too.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to our next question.
Lynn Farley-Rose. Like other cities in the UK, Southampton has significant numbers of people who have nowhere to call home. If you were elected, what would you do to ensure that everyone has somewhere warm, dry and safe to lay their head at night?
Thank you.
So Labour's principle and belief is that housing is a human right. Absolutely, everybody should have a decent home to live in that is good living standard. It's really important that we tackle property developers and capital speculators, that we start filling homes that have been left empty for too long. We can release pressure in our housing crisis if we start to use those properties properly. Universal credit has obviously had a significant impact on families and has left people homeless. So we do need to stop and scrap the universal credit system look again at our social security system, and make sure it's working for the people who need it. I'd also say what I've mentioned before about project funding. We need sustainable support for people who are looking for homes. It's not right to leave them on their own, and for projects to dry up and that support to disappear.
Thank you, Caroline.
Make no doubt about it, rough sleeping is a blight which we have to end. I think it's imperative that we expand the pilots and the initiatives that have already been started, such as the Rough Sleeping Initiative and Housing First. And if you talk to the big homelessness charities, organisations like St Mungo's, they will always talk about the success of Housing First. And I think that's very easy to understand, isn't it? That somebody who is out on the streets, their number one priority must be to get them into somewhere that is safe, that is warm, where they will be secure and sheltered. I have spent the last couple of years or so sitting first as a Cabinet Office Minister and then as a Home Office Minister on the Homelessness Task Force. And we saw a slight drop in the count last year, but it's not good enough. And I think it's absolutely imperative that we address this in a holistic way, because it's very obvious that those who are living rough on the streets, who are without homes, are some of the very most vulnerable in society, with a wide range of vulnerabilities, whether they be drug and alcohol issues, whether they be victims of abuse, whether they be people with mental health issues. And it's imperative that we work across government, using every department to make sure, whether it's health, whether it's communities and local government, whether it's the Home Office, that their needs are addressed.
Thank you. Great.
Clearly, homelessness is a blight on our society, and we should do everything we can to stop it by, first and foremost, let's treat these people as victims, not criminals. Let's repeal the Vagrancy Act. I don't think anyone particularly wants to be sleeping on the street. We don't have enough homes in this country. We need to build more. We haven't been building enough. We would like to build 300,000 homes a year. But on top of that, everyone deserves a roof over their head, regardless of what issues they have, whether they have issues with substances, alcohol, things like that. Absolutely. And that's another way where we need to have a multidisciplinary approach, to have these people given the help that they need, and to make sure that we get these people off the streets, because they don't want to be there, they don't need to be there. And a G6 country to have this, I've seen it getting worse in San Francisco. It's crazy. I don't want us to turn like that in San Francisco. It gets worse every year. We need to be looking after these people, and if places like Finland can do it by giving everyone a roof over their heads, then we certainly should be able to do it here too.
Thank you. And Geoff?
Yeah, there's something very, very wrong with a country when even when you're earning £15-20 an hour and you're working 5 days a week, you still can't afford to buy a home of your own. There's a very simple reason for it. The UK does not have a housing problem. It has a demand problem, with demand being fuelled by mass uncontrolled immigration. The supply of housing simply cannot keep up with the demand. We cannot stabilise the housing problem until we have controlled immigration. Also, overseas investors now purchase approximately 60% of residential new build properties in central London and around 30% of properties overall, thereby driving up property prices. If we've got a housing crisis in this country, surely the first thing the government's going to do is go to overseas investors and say, sorry, no, our own people can't afford houses. We'd stop that straight away. UKIP will also abolish stamp duty.
Thank you very much. Next question, please.
My name's Tom, and my question is, in view of the considerable benefit that it has on life chances, on social mobility and stability in childhood, what will you do to promote marriage as an essential part of a flourishing society? Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Tom, for that question. I think marriage in all its forms is the most secure and stable place to bring up children, but that shouldn't be to the detriment of other people who live in cohabiting, and we need to make sure they enjoy protections as well. I think how people choose to love and to live is entirely up to them, and I believe absolutely we should be promoting everyone in all walks of life, no matter how they choose to do that, to bring up their children. So that's fine. I don't believe we should be promoting marriage over and above any of the other areas that we should be people choose to live. It's a liberal after.
Thank you.
Thanks. So I very much support civil partnerships, same-sex marriage. Marriage shouldn't be confined to heteronormative standards. I think it's really important that everybody gets an education on what a healthy relationship looks like. A healthy relationship can give a child stability and ensure that they have confidence in life later on. But I don't know if everybody is fully aware of Labour's plans in terms of, for instance, maternity provisions. So we're going to be extending maternity leave and pay to 52 weeks, but also revising what parental rights and pay look like so that both parents, regardless of their gender, can be part of their child's upbringing.
Geoff.
We believe in stable, active, intact two-parent families are the bedrock of a robust society and the standard family. But like I said earlier, we are libertarians, and we believe that people should be left alone to live their lives how they want to live them without interference from the government or anybody else. But again, also free to say whatever they like about that. And yeah, about it really.
Thank you. Caroline.
There are sometimes some really lovely moments when I have absolutely no idea what the Conservative Party manifesto says on this, so you're going to get it straight from the heart. Please don't go around judging us single mothers, because we do the best that we can for our children. And relationships come in all different types. And whilst I freely admit that a marriage that works can be great for the stable upbringing for a child, ones that don't are not necessarily fantastic. And I spent, I never know whether to say a happy or a miserable year as the Minister for the Child Maintenance Service. And I saw the real damage that parents who are at war with each other can wreak upon their children. And I do think, and every time we discussed no-fault online divorces, Damien Green used to scream at me, declare an interest. And I just think that we have to teach children, as Claire said, and when you agree with your political opponents, you should always be prepared to acknowledge it. We need to teach children what stable relationships, the importance of stable relationships. We need to teach them to have confidence in themselves so that they can go on to establish those stable relationships. We also have to accept that marriage is not for everyone, and marriage comes in a wide variety of different forms, and I sort of reject the notion of the standard family. There is no such thing as a standard family. We should celebrate all different types of families and give individuals and families the support that they need.
Thank you. Next question, please.
My name's Keith. My question is, do you believe the law on abortion is too lax, too restrictive, or about right?
Thank you. Geoff.
I suppose it's really a choice that lies with women, personally. Personally, I believe that all life is precious, but everybody should be free to make their own choices. I certainly don't think it should go right up to, I think they're thinking of increasing the amount of time now that you can almost abort right up until you're due or something like that. I certainly don't think that's a good idea. I think it should definitely be discouraged. It's like I say, I think all life is precious, regardless of how it came about. So,
thank you. Greg.
Yes. I think it's a highly sensitive topic that should primarily be between a woman and her healthcare professionals. And I've had quite a few emails about this recently, especially in relation to the Both Lives Matters pledge. I originally trained as a doctor. I was a surgeon, so I a bit more knowledge about what's involved here. I think the law, given what we know about fetal development, I'll give you a much longer question than answer in 60 seconds, is about right. because the 20-week abnormality scan is called that for a reason, because the abnormalities can often not be picked up till 20 weeks, which is why the current law allows for abortions to be up to later than that. And that would be a very difficult decision for everyone to make. And then after that, only if there's life-threatening for the mother involved. But it's a very sensitive subject. I ultimately think it's something that should be down to healthcare professionals and their patients to make very tough choices.
Thank you. Caroline.
Well, Craig's right. These are very tough choices, and I believe that we should be led by the science. I apologise if this is something I've said previously, but I vividly remember back in 2001, the Conservative candidate for the then Romsey constituency had a baby born at 23 weeks. And Francis is alive and well, but with some health challenges to this day, and mercilessly bullied by his two younger sisters. And, you know, it's something that I think it's imperative that we look closely at the science and we keep it under review. And I would be very open to discussion and debate that was science-led in Parliament, and gosh, that's a rare thing to occur. And I think that there is scope maybe for slight reductions in the current time, but, you know, certainly I think that that's something that we should be influenced by medical professionals. And I think that it absolutely, you know, terminations are tragic whenever they happen, but in some instances they are for the best.
Thank you. And Claire.
Thanks for your question, Keith. In my opinion, at the moment, abortion law in the UK is on the side of being too restrictive. There are only certain circumstances and conditions that have to be met for a woman to have an abortion legally, and that includes attending a certain number of appointments and having the sign-off of 2 doctors. That to me doesn't really give a woman real freedom of choice, and I very much support a woman's right to choose. I have to say, the Both Lives pledge that I have been asked to sign, I can't support the reduction in the gestational period where it is legal to have an abortion. Women attend health clinics for abortions for various different reasons, and delays can happen. So I really don't support that particular part of that pledge. So I hope that answers the question. We've just been conscious of the time limit.
Next question, please.
Good evening. My name's Jonathan, and my question is this. Some political parties have pledged to legalise marijuana in their manifestos in response to increasing public support for the move. Do you believe that recreational use of marijuana should be legalised?
Let's hear from Caroline first of all. Thank you.
I think I might give you the shortest answer of the night. No.
Thank you. Short but sweet. Let's hear from Geoff. Thank you.
I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say yes. I don't think there's anything in here about marijuana. Like I said earlier, we're a libertarian a libertarian party, and you know, if you want to smoke marijuana, you can, and you know, you what you put into your body is up to you. Nobody else can say what you can and can't put into your body. The moment that they do, they own you, in my opinion. I think the most important thing regarding drugs is education. You know, you tell people how to take the drugs, what the effects are likely to be. That you might want to have a little bite to eat before. You shouldn't have pills on an empty stomach, for example. Yeah, no, I mean, that goes for aspirin and paracetamol too. So education is the most important thing. And if somebody does get off their head, don't put them in a cage. That doesn't help either. So yeah, education, I think, is the important thing. Proper education.
Thank you. Claire.
Thank you. So obviously that question's about recreational use. I do think there's an argument for legalisation in terms of medical purposes. I would be concerned about retaining marijuana as keeping the classification as illegal, because it does definitely feed into criminal activity. And there are children in this city being used as drug runners. So I think we do need to take a balanced view on what that means in terms of children's futures, but also the level of crime in the city, as well as any benefits, whether that's recreational or medical.
Thank you very much. And Craig.
Obviously, that was aimed in my direction, most likely. Evidence-based approach, prohibition doesn't work. It hasn't been working for decades. Drug use is a healthcare and education issue, not a criminal one. Drug supply, now that is a criminal issue. And this is the thing. I mean, to keep doing the same thing and expecting different results is a form of madness. It isn't working. So we need to take a better approach. And there's plenty of evidence coming out from Canada, from the 10 US states where it's been legalized, and in Portugal, which isn't just about saying, yay, cannabis is free, go use it. It's about having the balanced approach of making sure there's the education, the support networks involved, as well as not criminalizing people for doing something. They're going to do it anyway. They're going to get hold of it. Drug use in this country is high as it's ever been. Prohibition isn't working. Simple as that.
Thank you. Back to the questionnaire. Do you want to follow up in any way? Do you want to say perhaps where that question is coming from?
I believe that the general consensus of medical professionals is that the drugs that are in cannabis are harmful. They cause an increased heart rate, which will increase the chance for heart attack, lung damage, developmental problems in children. I can understand wanting to legalise it for the purpose of stopping the criminality, but how do you feel about legalising something that does cause that kind of harm to people?
You've just explained a lot of the aspects of alcohol and tobacco as well. So they're legal.
True.
They're both responsible for far more harm than cannabis is.
Mm-hmm. Let's go, if we may, to Mr. Poppleton with your question.
Thanks, Orlando. I think we all know that the policies of the various parties on the environment and climate change vary from modest to very ambitious. What we as voters need to know is that to believe these policies, how they're costed and how they can realistically be implemented. So could I ask you to please tell us your plans that your party has for putting your environmental policy into action, how it's going to be implemented during government?
Thank you. It may be worth just briefly in the introduction to your answers to that actually summarising what your policy is before addressing the financial realities of how it's going to be costed. First of all, Geoff.
We have a new manifesto coming out tomorrow. But in our industry section, it does say, our national strategy has therefore been to increase the range of the UK's products with a particular emphasis on sustainable design principles, namely the 3 R's: reuse, repair, and recycle. I think this is one of the biggest problems of today. It's this globalist, consumer-driven throwaway culture where there's just far too much overconsumption, excessive production of short life, single-use, throwaway, disposable items. UKIP favours durable goods that can be repaired and reused. The problem is, how do you stop people buying the cheap rubbish? Well, it's quite simple. Perhaps if you were to tax the cheap rubbish, make it just as expensive as the more durable, the quality goods, then competition would perhaps become a bit more about how good you can make your product, as opposed to how cheap you can get away with making it. And there'll be less rubbish in the world, less pollution, fewer carbon footprints.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah, 60 seconds for this one. Well, we're very clear we want to invest heavily in the technology approach. So that's $5 billion in the Green Investment Bank because the private sector can't do it quickly enough. There's not enough Elon Musks in this world to develop the technology. We need to do it from a public perspective. 60 million trees and 100 billion a year into infrastructure. How we pay for it? Well, we've got a very well-costed manifesto. In fact, it's the only major party manifesto that the Institute for Fiscal Studies says is reasonable. The other two it doesn't think are deliverable. And that's how we'll pay for it. Primarily from the certainty of staying in the EU and what that will mean to our trade revenues and revenues to the country's coffers. But yeah, we've got a very ambitious plan, 2045 net zero. I don't think anything faster than that with current technology is good enough, but it might be if we get the breakthroughs quicker on things like storage and capture technology.
Thank you. Caroline.
I don't think this is possible in 60 seconds, but since 1990, the UK has cut emissions by more than 40% whilst growing the economy with the best performance of any G20 nation. We now have enough solar power to power almost 2.7 million homes and are the most attractive market in the world for investment in offshore wind. We have to continue that. The government has a commitment to close all coal-fired power stations by 2025, and we are making progress in cutting carbon emissions. But we have to look at carbon capture and storage as well, and the government has plans to bring that online by the middle of the next decade, so by 2025. We're planning a £500 million Blue Planet Fund to protect our oceans from plastic pollution, from warming sea temperatures, and to prevent overfishing. And I think I said recently that I think looking after our oceans should be one of our most significant environmental commitments. We also have to invest in flood defences because we can be very conscious in this constituency, with Mansbridge having a flood warning only at the start of last week, that we are very vulnerable to climate activities in this area. But it's not something that individual parties or individual countries can do alone. This is something that absolutely requires a global effort, and I'm delighted that we will be hosting the next COP conference.
Thank you very much. Okay.
So obviously there's been discussion about carbon capture and absorption. So Labour have committed to planting 2 billion trees, and that's between now and 2040. We've set aside 2.5 billion for that tree planting plan, and Canada have committed to a similar target. So we know it's very much realistic. In terms of what's going on for homes and carbon release and fuel poverty, we're going to commit to insulating homes. And there'll be interest-free grants for people who can afford it, or loans, and then there'll be grants for those homes that might struggle to otherwise improve their homes in terms of energy efficiency. How it's being paid for, Labour's going to introduce a windfall tax on oil companies. So that will mean that companies that knowingly damage our climate will cover the costs of us implementing measures to mitigate climate change.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next question, please.
Hi, I'm Pete. As a parent, I'm concerned about the new legislation for sex and relationships education. My concern is that in the name of tolerance, children will be taught to be intolerant of any who don't hold to liberal views of sex, marriage and gender. So my question is, how are you going to protect the freedom of speech and conscience of those who hold to traditional views on these issues?
Thank you. Claire?
So I do hold quite liberal views, but I very much respect people who are of faith and who do hold traditional views on what a family looks like and what relationships should be. I have to say that I feel that I wasn't considered when I was at school. I was at school under Section 28, so I was not educated about anything other than heteronormative relationships, and I think that's quite damaging. But I think it's really important that we respect one another's views and respectfully debate each other's views and actually come to a consensus on what's best for people and respecting their culture and whether they do hold, like you said, the more traditional view. I think we just need a little bit more, I think just a bit more of an appreciation of where everybody else is coming from and patience with each other's views. I think debate is healthy and education is relationships. It's really important at a young age.
Thank you. Caroline?
Well, I've both argued in favour of and voted in favour of extending sex and relationship education, but making sure that it's done in an age-appropriate way. I think our young people are an absolute beacon of tolerance and understanding and are far better than those of us who are old enough to have gained a number of prejudices through our lives at understanding others and their different values. And I think it's imperative through our school system. And I always say this, from a little bit of personal experience that parents can sometimes be the worst people at teaching their children about healthy relationships, and sometimes they set them the worst examples as well. And it would be lovely if that was not the case, but sadly it is. And I think it's imperative that within our school system we have a balanced and open and a tolerant and a safe space in which children can learn about different types of relationships and all types, and whether they be traditional marriages or whether they be any sort of relationship, that without the ability to discuss it in an open way, then children won't be able to form those healthy relationships themselves.
Thank you. Great.
This is very much an education thing in terms of, it doesn't matter. The educational system there is to equip people with the tools of facts of life and how things are, and encouraging ignorance in people isn't a great way to build a more tolerant and educated society. Back when I was training, actually, I did 3 months going into schools and giving sex education to children. I was trained to do it, went and did it. I was shocked at the ignorance, how little they had been taught. I hear it's a lot better now. We had to fill in a lot of the gaps very quickly. If we want people to be to contribute to society, they need to understand it and be tolerant, whilst we absolutely have to be respectful of people's values and what they think about things. So I think we have to teach our children about what the evidence shows us, what the spectrum of humanity is, and that is how you breed.
Thank you. Geoff.
UKIP opposes gender confusion ideologies and the implementation of compulsory LGBT inclusive relationships education in primary schools, which was due to be introduced this year in September. So I don't know how that's going, but we would perhaps only start to educate kids about, perhaps as something outside the norm in adolescence, when they're becoming sexually aware themselves, perhaps. Like I said earlier, we're a libertarian party. We believe people should be able to do what they want to do in their own time. You don't need to push it on other people, especially not infant school children. They really shouldn't be aware of sexuality at that kind of age, should they? At any kind of level. Talking about parents, UKIP opposes the disempowerment of parents by the state, whereby institutions increasingly dictating the norms and values children learn and supplanting the role of parents. For example, the education system is being used more as a means of indoctrination than education. You're telling them what to think, not how to think. We will introduce further safeguards into the operation of the family courts to ensure that injustices are not perpetrated on parents.
Thank you. Well, look, we need to start drawing the evening to a close. It's past 7 o'clock. As we do, I thought it might be good to hear one last time from the candidates. And I've got a simple question, which is this. In the light of all that we've heard this evening, what is one thing, and please, could you hear that? What is one thing that you would like us to bear in mind as we cast our votes next week? Geoff.
Outside the European Union, Britain will be a more prosperous nation. It will regain control of its policy, its business, its unnecessary regulation, regain control of agricultural industry and restore its fishing industry. It will increase its prosperity. It will mean more jobs. It will mean more tax revenue to pay for the things we all want for the British people.
Thank you. Great.
I think of one thing to take away is we can remain in the EU, and that is the best deal we have on the table. That is the way we will pay for increases into the investment in public services that have been starved for the last 9 years of the Conservative government. I mean, who here believes that the next 5 years are going to be any better should the Conservatives win a majority? Hardly anyone. Put your arm up. There's a couple of you at least. So I value your faith. So I think in this constituency in particular, it is a straight fight between myself and Caroline. That is the way it's looking in all the polls. That is the way all the factual voting sites will tell you.
1.5% behind them.
Absolutely, they are. So certainly I was here on the doorsteps. So you have a choice for the no deal, Boris Brexit, or you have the option to remain by voting for a Liberal Democrat candidate.
Thank you. Temperature's rising slightly in the room, I think, just at the moment. But let's crack on, Claire.
I'm going to say two things. I'd like when everyone goes to the polls to consider the future of generations. People are going to come after you, but also the most vulnerable in our society, and who is going to work in the interests of everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, you're going to get a completely off-the-wall answer from me. So before I came out this evening, I was watching the David Attenborough programme, and there were a pair of feral hamsters squabbling over some flowers. And the thing that struck me is it doesn't have to be like that. Our politics doesn't have to be about squabbling. We do far better when we find consensus, when we are prepared to work together. I have always and consistently said, sometimes incurring the wrath of the Prime Minister, that pragmatism is the solution, and even Craig acknowledges that I have been a pragmatic Member of Parliament for this constituency.
Thank you. Well, look, that concludes the questions we have for this evening. Thank you very much indeed to the audience here for taking part. Thank you for thinking through your questions and for being gracious as you've listened and giving the time of day, or evening, I should say, to each of the candidates as they've sought to answer your questions. I hope it's been a helpful evening in terms of preparing to cast your votes in just a few days' time. Thank you too for the candidates, not just for coming along this evening and giving up your Sunday evening. I do appreciate that it is quite a sacrifice to give up a weekend slot like this when you could be resting. But also thank you to the candidates for being willing to stand in this election. Thank you for your concern for this area, your concern for the issues that we've been discussing. Thank you for being prepared to sacrifice time and energy and perhaps even lucrative careers for the good of our nation, running for Parliament. I wonder if we could thank them appropriately. This is the end of our evening. It's not the end of our programme here at Burgess Road Library. The programme continues right the way through the Christmas period. This time next week, this whole building will be in Christmas carol mode. And if you are in good voice and you want to help us raise the roof, come along and fill the building with your voice. I think there's some flyers at the back with times if that's of interest to you. I thought I might close this evening in prayer. I appreciate prayer is not everybody's thing here this evening. So if that's not your thing, please just be quiet, just think and whatever. But I think for those of us who are praying people, this is an opportunity to commit these candidates to God. So let's pray if you feel that you'd like to do that. Our dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the privilege of living in this free country. Thank you for the privilege of democracy. I want to thank you for each of these candidates around me, for Geoff and for Craig, for Claire and for Caroline, for their dedication to the good of this nation and for the sacrifices they've made to run in this election. Pray for wisdom for voters. Would you help us as a constituency, as a nation, to choose wisely as we cast our votes? And whoever does take the seat in this constituency, would you use them to work justice and equity and prosperity in this nation? Amen. Once again, thank you to all for coming. Thank you to the candidates. Have a very happy Christmas. I can say that now because it's Advent without fear of recriminations for people all around. One final applause for our candidates and those who don't vote.